All right, hello. Thank you. Welcome to our guest speaker series here with the Middleton Stage Crew. Today we have SM Payson joining us from New York City and the Atlantic Theater Company. And we're just gonna chat here a little bit today about how Payson got into theater and kind of like what the career path looks like, and what people should kind of plan on doing if that's a path that they are interested in following. So welcome, Payson. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you spending the time. And if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into theater.
Yeah, for sure. So I have been in the industry 20-ish years or so. I originally grew up in a really small town in New Hampshire. There was like 60 people in my graduating class, 7 towns went to that one school. It was like real tiny. And the idea that you could pursue a career in the arts was not a normal thing at all. And I sort of fell into it by accident. Did sports forever, but I had knee surgery, and so I sort of needed to find another extracurricular. Not very good at staying still and not doing anything, and quarantine has certainly hammered home that has not changed. So I started doing the drama club. It wasn't an official thing. There weren't theater classes or anything like that. It was just this very informal club run by this woman, Mrs. O'Leary, who was just extremely passionate about it. And I fell in love. It just spoke to me. I never wanted to be on the acting side. I always wanted to be on the technical side. Just the idea of sort of that behind the scenes work and creative problem solving and all that just really spoke to me. And it was just a team, but with a different end game rather than a goal. It was a performance. So it still kind of spoke to me. And then I started looking at colleges my junior year, and I didn't really know where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. And my drama club teacher, she took me aside and she's like, you could do this as a living. You don't have to go to a school or conservatory or whatever for it, but just think about it. And it was something that really stuck home. I guess I come from an educated family. They would take me to Boston and things like that. But just the idea that the people that did that also did it as a career was just like something I never thought of. And so it was something I kind of kept in mind when I looked at schools. And I ended up going to St. Michael's College in Vermont, in Burlington, Vermont. And it's a liberal arts school. And I went in undecided at first and ended up partway through to change my major to being theater. And again, it was really inspired by a really passionate professor, John Devlin, who's actually from Wisconsin, and that's I feel like grew up in Middletown, maybe somewhere close by. But it all comes around. It's a very small world.
Yeah.
And it was his first year, and he just really took me under his wing, and he's like, you're really good at this and you should do as much of it as you can. And I did, and just it fueled just a huge passion in me. And I originally went to be a TD. I really loved working with my hands, and I really loved that aspect of it. It's a little hard to tell, but I'm 5'0", and so my ability to manhandle a sheet of 4x8 anything is hard. And so that sort of had me checking other things out. And while I was nothing but supported at my college, I certainly didn't see a lot of other female TDs or other females who were, or even just like kind of smaller people working in the TD field. It was usually like big dudes. And so I started exploring other things, and I really sort of fell into stage management. I love working with people. I love, again, working on that team. And that's a thing that I kind of just sort of fell into. So from there, I did summer theaters and continue to meet people. And I think if that's anything to stress in my career is that I haven't really applied for that many jobs, but knowing people and being a personable person and a good person to work with really has done volumes for my career versus having like a really great resume or like applying for jobs with a fancy cover letter. While those things are important, they certainly, the people aspect of it has certainly been a big part of my career. And in particular, one of those was Catherine Doherty. If you ever cross paths with her, she's amazing. She's a director. She's now working at SUNY New Paltz. But she's just incredible. And she's kind of one of those people that's worked everywhere. She knows everybody. She's done everything. And she's just like the type of person that you would drop everything to work for. And so she was like, well, why don't you come work for my theater company? And I said, okay, sure. And so that was Northern Stage in Vermont. And there is where I met my partner, who I've been with for 13 years. And I followed him to Florida because I thought I could live anywhere, which is not true. As a New England girl, Florida was super hard. It was very hot and I didn't like it as much. But while I was there, it was right during the 2008, 2009 recession, very similar to now. And so theater work was very hard to come by. And I fell into the rock and roll scene with House of Blues. And I worked there essentially as a stage manager. It's they call it a stage manager, but it's a little bit more involved than that. It's green room. It's working with production managers to figure out what the band's needs. It's kind of like this middle ground. And with them, I picked up some touring work. I did some Warped Tour back in the day. I did the House of Blues stuff, which was on the Disney property, as well as Roger Daughtry, who's from The Who, and Joe Perry from Aerosmith, while Steven Tyler was deciding if he was going to go. I think he was going to become a shaman maybe at that point. I don't know, something weird. But anyway, Joe Perry was doing his own tour. And that was sort of that kind of weird interlude in my life. But I still get called occasionally by a couple artists that they sort of know where I am, and if they need sort of somebody to finesse their tour or help their tour come in, they still call me. So that's always a kind of a cool part. From there, I basically resume papered the entire country, and looking for just a new way not to be in Florida, to be perfectly honest. And I ended up getting linked up with this company called Food Play. And they were a touring theater for young audiences company. And it's basically was two actors and a stage manager, and you were in a van and you drove across the US. Or in one point we took bush planes and dog sleds in Alaska. It was a very cool experience, and it was run by this absolutely crazy woman. Like how she created this company, I don't know, but she won an Emmy for it, and we were Michelle Obama's Kids Eat Right initiative company, and we were going to these really small, tiny, like Pueblo towns that had like 10 kids, and that was K through 12, all the way to like big urban schools that you had to do, 6 shows just to get all the kids through, and juggling was the medium, and it just was a really amazingly cool experience. And that you got to like touch and influence so many kids. And it's pretty hard to feel bad about your life when you have 400 like pre-K through 5th graders doing like the full-on belly laugh. And then that's your job. And it was just a very cool experience. From there, I ended up being their production manager. And so I was with them for a total of 6 years, 3 on the road, 3 in their office. And that's when James Cleveland, who owned Production Corps, and who is my partner's best friend, started being like, well, hey, I need a production manager in New York, and Massachusetts isn't so far away, so come do one show. And so I did one show, and that was at New World. It's the place where I met Zane. And I did one show, and then I did 2, and then suddenly I was doing so many shows that I was never at my apartment in Massachusetts, and I was always subletting in New York. And while New York isn't necessarily where I ended up or where I wanted to be, it was certainly the right time to move. And then I just did show after show after show after show. And my niche kind of became doing transfers of sorts. So that would be doing shows like Peter and the Starcatcher, which was coming from Broadway to off Broadway. And it was semi-successful, I think. It was certainly too big for the space, and the producers weren't quite so prepared, but certainly learned a lot. And then shows going the other way, going from off-Broadway onto tours, onto Broadway engagements or other licensed productions elsewhere in the country. And so that really kind of harkened back to my touring background, both with rock and roll and with my food play background. And it's just something that I loved. I love being in a different place every day. And I loved meeting all the new people and walking to a space, and you know, it kind of really bred home how small the industry is. I remember walking into I think it was in Washington, and there was a guy that I had done a load in with in Moscow in Russia when I was doing a study abroad, like years ago. A dude I'd worked with in Florida, and a guy that I had gone to high school with, like, and he was just like driving trucks in Washington now. And it just is a crazy way that the world is just so small, and I just love that aspect of it. So I spent about 6, 7 years on the road in various sorts, and I started getting a little bit older and realizing I was paying a lot for an apartment in New York City, and didn't necessarily spend any time in it. And my partner and I were always like ships passing in the night, and so on a whim, I applied to the Atlantic. It's terrible. I had never heard of them prior to making the application. I like walked past the building. I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool place. And then it popped up on Playbill, I think. And so I applied, and the artistic director and I just really hit it off. He's from Vermont, so we like knew the same people, the same places, skied the same mountains, and that kind of thing. And so it just really seemed like a great fit, and it has been a great fit. There's sort of like this little bit of like a hippier-ish kind of crazy theater people doing theater, but not in like the high stress New York kind of way. And it's just a really cool company. We do only new works. They're either world premieres or US premieres. We have a track record to Broadway. Band's Visit was ours. We currently have, if Broadway ever opens again, we have Hangman and Darren Brown on Broadway. Spring Awakening originally was us, and we have a couple of our past seasons that are just sort of waiting for producerials to come in. So that aspect of it's cool, but we also do a lot of smaller shows that are just cool pieces. Florian Zeller did The Mother for us with Isabelle Huppert, and they just wanted to do a cool show, and that included making a 30-foot couch disappear into the deck, and we don't have a trap, we don't have flies, we're like a 20 by 30 space that was an old church. So it's just kind of a cool space to see if we can do cool things in, and people want to come and do that with us, and it just kind of makes a really neat environment. So yeah, that's kind of my career in a semi-long nutshell.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I definitely like second the this is a people business first and foremost, and like anything that any one of us can do to just like first and foremost be a good person and be a good teammate is going to help take your career
For sure.
wherever you want it to go first and foremost. And I think that's like also a skill that's just transferable to any industry that you end up working in. It's really about people, and then that engagement with the audience. And though I can't remember who told me it first, but it was like on the first tour I did, they were like, we would rather have a nice, tolerable person than the best person do this job. So don't forget that. So
I hire a lot of people, a lot of people, because we do freelance mainly in our space for labor. And one of I'm really fortunate. My crew heads are really amazing, that my crews are really great. And I think that's one of the things, is that that's a value that we prioritize above anything else. We are so happy for somebody to take a little bit longer to teach somebody the skills, as long as they're a cool member who brings a positive energy, who brings forward moving thinking that isn't like, in tour we call it stank man. Like you're just like kind of like grouchy and whatever, and not everybody has a great day every day for sure, but like when you bring that energy and it just tamps things down, oh man, it's so bad and it's so hard. And I think like on the production side, especially because things go wrong all the time. They doesn't matter how well you plan and how many things you've got like perfectly set out, like things just don't go to plan. And if you've got a good, positive, forward moving attitude team, you can take on so much more than if everybody's kind of like at each other's throats. It also makes our team that much more cohesive, that I don't always have to hire 8 electricians for something and 14 carps for something. I can build a team that has their strengths for sure, but the idea that everybody's good people and that they can work together makes it so much stronger, and so that everybody can kind of work together on projects, and it makes us so much faster and so much more efficient.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll hop off my soapbox.
We got a question here kind of popping up in the chat just about like even before you began drama club, like on your theatrical journey, like
Yeah.
what was your kind of initial exposure to theater, and like being from a small town, like how did you find that exposure, and like how did that shape you wanting to get into it eventually?
Yeah, I have to be honest, it was really incidental. It wasn't anything calculated. Both my mom's parents were teachers, and one of the classes my grandfather taught was music, and he's a really amazing violinist. So music was kind of always there, and she grew up in New Haven, and New Haven used to be the tryout town for New York. So tons of shows at the Schubert there, and there's another theater, I can't remember what the name was, but like the Yale rep is there, and so it has this really rich history. And so it was just kind of an artistic priority. And my mom's a really great artist. I should also mention that. She's a painter, but is amazing. So art was sort of from that side. And then on my dad's side, they're supporters of the arts. They're not very artistic, but it was always, there was a legacy on my my paternal grandmother's side, where they were donated a lot to the theater in Roxbury, and his next door neighbor was Arthur Miller, and so like it kind of came from his side as well. So there was sort of just a incidental exposure to it my whole life, and going to Boston is just like kind of a thing when you're in New Hampshire. It's like it's a little hard to describe. I guess maybe it's like going to Chicago for you guys. Maybe, I don't know. It's like a real city.
Yeah, for sure.
And like my town had a stoplight, and that was kind of it. So that was kind of it. It was just sort of a thing that I enjoyed, but it wasn't like I have to see all the theater I could possibly see or anything like that. There was this great actually summer stock that was one town over that we would go to sometimes, but it was by this guy named Norman, and he used to be a big deal New York producer, and he and his buddies would come and do theater like literally in a barn until last year. I think last year is the first year that they got their AC, but it's like literally beams barn. And it was I kind of went to that, but again, it was sort of this incidental experiences that were just sort of there, and it wasn't until I just needed something to do that it kind of got me. And I think that's, if I do have to say anything about having a liberal arts versus a conservatory education, I think that was one of the cool things, is that in my liberal arts education in college, I did so many different classes that brought so many different things to my art. But also my best friend, who is now I think he's the director of production is his title. But anyway, he runs the Flynn up in Burlington. And he was out running a big theater in Tacoma, whose name I can't remember right now. But he was a business major, and he had no idea about doing theater. And I needed help building something again, because I couldn't handle the 4x8 sheets of something. And he's like, "Oh, I really dig this." And so he did. He helped me with one show and then turned another. And then by the end of it, he ended up being this really amazing TD, and it became his career. So I think that's kind of the other thing. Like, you don't necessarily need to go to a conservatory, or you don't necessarily need to go to these really prestigious places, like you can get a really amazing education and all these different exposures at other places as well. And it kind of all brings you to the art. You don't have to like decide that this is your thing, or like if you go in as a lighting designer, you may come out as a production manager or stage manager or whatever. It's the cool thing about theater. It's so malleable. It's so changing.
Yeah.
Your career can do that too.
Nice. Yeah, thanks. Um, so could you maybe talk a little bit about like just what the role of a production manager is too? Like, you know, we try to do a pretty good job of like splitting up and having our crew heads, and we have a stage managers and kind of our lighting designers, and a lot of that is student led. And then I kind of end up filling the role of a production manager, and that's something that I'd kind of like to have that be more of a role for a student in the future, but it's kind of hard to get off the ground right
Yeah.
now. So just kind of, if you could talk about like what your actual role is and kind of like what you do for a show and like where
Sure.
you take it to.
Yeah, so production managers are actually relatively new um, in the scene as far as in the terms of theater in general, I guess. There's sort of, for a long time, the history of there's been stage managers who have technical skills, or TDs who have like budgeting skills and that kind of thing. And for a long time, it was really filled by those sort of roles. And it was really bigger institutions or schools who had production managers. And it's really what it's developed into is a sort of niche-esque position where you're sort of like the eyes on the whole project, and to varying degrees, and it's different everywhere you go. Your role as a production manager on a commercial production, which is just a one solitary gig and show, and it sort of begins and ends with that show, versus like me right now at the Atlantic, where I have a whole season, and sometimes I'm looking 3 or 4 seasons ahead. It sort of changes depending on your situation, but basically you are coordinating the whole thing from the production end. Good production management teams work really well with stage managers, sort of hand in hand in so many ways. And if you have a good stage management and production management team, there's like, it's like the best thing ever. It makes everything so much easier. But you're really starting at most shows start at the top, where you want to do a show. And so you sort of coordinate that initial bit of designers and budget and what's the schedule, and sort of kind of creating those beginning building blocks. And there's no specific formula to that. Every production manager kind of has their own. But at the end of the day, it's a little bit of a shot in the dark. It's sort of what the company can afford or what the producers can afford. And it's sort of just like this guideline of like how you're going to do the show production wise. And then it's about creating a team and the materials to make that happen. I'm really, really amazingly fortunate. I sort of view my technical knowledge as a puddle. It's really wide, but not very deep. And I'm so blessed to have amazing production heads who then become involved in that process with me. And so we coordinate with the designers and figure out what the design is. And the design always comes out too much, too much time, too much money, all the things. And so me and my heads, we figure out the best way that we can make that happen. And sometimes we have to go back to the drawing board. But a lot of times it's sort of a negotiation of figuring out how to make the essence of that vision happen within the time and the means that we have. And that's labor, that's materials, that's how many people can be working in the space at a time. And it's sort of this like great chessboard or risk board, I guess is a better analogy, of all the moving pieces. And then you introduce the cast aspect of it. And so about the same time you're loading in, it's about the same time they're in rehearsal. And so then in real time, you're handling the things that are coming out of rehearsal. And so it may be crazy new prop requests, and maybe a permit is needed for it, or maybe we need to shop something out so that a specialty shop can build it or something like that. And so you're working with your props master to figure that out. One of the big things I deal with with at the Atlantic, because it's all new productions, sometimes a whole scene is cut and a new one is in. The season before I was at the Atlantic, they did a Stephen Adly Gerges piece, and he had this whole like crazy dynamic scene written in a bathroom, and the designer had designed a turntable and the bathroom was on it, and during tech the bathroom scene got cut, so that bathroom just went around every time. It was too late to get rid of it, but it was just there. And so you're constantly kind of dealing with things like that. And then everybody gets into the room together, and that's where a lot of the psychology of being a stage manager comes into play, because that is a lot of personality in the room. It's both what's on stage, there's the design team, maybe there's producers, there's your own team. And when I say personalities, I don't mean that it's like bad personalities, just a lot of creative energy that everybody's bringing. They're bringing different aspects. And so as a production manager, you are not only supporting what's going on in the room sort of physically for scene changes and things and notes calls and things like that, but you're also trying to negotiate and balance and make sure that everybody is sort of taken care of creatively, which not every production manager would agree with me that that's part of their jobs. But again, much like being a good person, I think that's a really important thing, because if you have people who feel like they're being heard, even if you can't make the flamethrower end up on stage, at least you listen to that artistic idea and you can talk about like, maybe you can have like a spark machine or like whatever. There's so many different ways, but it's amazing kind of what that psychology it does for a team and able to make it a more cohesive production. And sometimes it's really successful and other times it just isn't. But it's always the hope. And then we get into previews, and previews, again, are very different depending on what kind of production you're putting forward. If it's like Little Shop of Horrors, that like essentially you know what it is, and so it's your artistic take on that show, and you're sort of putting it in front of audiences and you're sort of noting it, is a little bit different than a lot of the shows that we do in New York, where they're new productions. And so again, who knows, maybe you're rehearsing an entire new scene. Again, we did another Stephen Adly Gerges piece this year, and we literally never did a run until first preview, and we suddenly found out it was 4 hours long. And I was like, oh my God, I don't even have enough time to turn over like the stage. There was a goat involved. Like he's a brilliant man, but a very crazy man to do a show with. And so suddenly, like every day, we're like, okay, we got to cut 20 minutes out today. We got to cut 45 minutes out today. And then you got to like kind of backtrack what all that means. And so, again, previews can just be very different depending on where you go. And so your job as a production manager is to really be actively working in real time to figure that out. And your budget has got to be like spot on. You have to know exactly how much money you have. And again, figuring out what that relationship is with your designers is really key, because sometimes it may be like talking to the lighting designer and be like, you've got to be okay with that dark spot for another day, because it's going to take us the entire notes call to get the thing underneath it built that you then have to light. And so it's again, it's that sort of negotiation and kind of working with people's personalities could kind of manifest that. And then you get to opening, and then you get to go to the open night party. And you get to breathe a little bit, and just kind of work then to support your crews. And sometimes things happen so fast that there's a lot of notes calls in your process, and so you're constantly supporting it that way. Or sometimes it's free and easy, and I get to take a vacation, which is always exciting. And then you break it down, and depending on what its future life is, it may be you're just putting it all in the dumpster, and we actively green recycle at my theater, or maybe you're packing it up to send it to another theater, or you're sending it to storage because it's going to go to Broadway. And so then you're organizing whatever that next life is. So it's a lot of like reaction and trying to be proactive versus reactive, so that when you need to be reactive, you're not trying to think about other things too that could have been solved ahead of time. And it's a lot of dealing with people, which I love. It's my favorite part about it.
We had an interesting question just kind of pop up that's on topic here. There's another couple that we'll kind of get to at the end, I think. But as a production manager, like how much like math and writing is involved in your day-to-day job?
Um, for writing, there's so many emails, so many emails. But not to scare you, like it's a lot of email. I have everybody CC me on absolutely everything. Mainly because it makes my job way easier if I'm sort of reading things as it comes along. And I can jump in when things are going rogue. So it's a little defensive in that aspect. But I do write a ton of emails. Um, the I would say it's a little bit more casual in that sense. I think, again, the personality aspect of it is something that I hold very strong, so that it's not like dear sir or madam when I'm talking to my shops. It is a little bit more of like, hey Meg, because she's my rep, and it's a little bit more casual and less formal. But there are those other things that are more formal where you're needing to write to the city or write to maybe a donor, or you're doing reference letters or things like that. So there's I would say a fair amount of writing. Math, there is a lot of math. But I would say that it's not like, in my experience, mainly because I'm dyslexic. I think I should say that out loud. I do a lot of cut and paste, and I do a lot of Excel. If you're looking, I think in general in production, take Excel classes, take Google Suite classes. It makes things so much easier. My budgets, I have a template, and so I'm only really filling in, excuse me, sorry, I had a little bit of burp. I'm really only filling in 2 columns in the beginning of my season to budget, and then it auto populates all the way through. And I have a ledger that I'm cut and pasting things out of when I get expense reports and that sort of thing to it. So I find that a lot of the math, I'm sort of cheating out of it because it's done for me. You also make way fewer mistakes. So I think that's, I would say, is pretty heavy. I am not good at doing math in my head. I am not one of those people that can just pull numbers out of the air. My partner, Dave, he's a director of production at the New 42 here, and he can do that. And it's like magic to me. I'm not very good at it. So I would say if you are feeling nervous because maybe math isn't your main skill, there's certainly ways to work around it. I would also say that it takes a lot of practice. I wasn't good at budgeting or being able to sort of assign numbers to things until I've been doing it for a few years. And it's amazing how much you learn, I think, in the industry in general by doing it. I think being scared that you're not going to be perfect at it right away is an attitude you should get rid of as soon as you possibly can. Because the sooner you can get into it and get your hands on it, you're going to learn so much more than just sitting and reading about it. In my opinion, there's a lot of people who disagree with me, but that's how I feel. So yeah, I think there's a lot of both things, but I think it's certainly not an insurmountable part. And I think there is as many different ways to production manage as there are people. And so production managing is a lot about finding out how you communicate all of those details and all of those things. And it may be heavier on one side or the other, depending on what your style is.
That's great. I think you've touched on this a little bit, but if we could kind of move into like advice that you'd give to people that like maybe want to get into production management or like kind of follow a similar career path, if there's anything that you'd kind of like suggest to kind of really pay attention to, or some things that maybe you could skip, or
yeah. So I would say that there's not one way to do it. I think, again, I feel like that's like my one thing. I'm like, bullet points for being a person, is being a good person. I think that's huge. That's the type of personality that sticks out when you're on a call. And, I get calls all the time from my carps, especially, and they're like, hey, there was this like new person, and I don't remember their name, but they were super chill, and we need to add a carp. Do you know who that was? And, and those are the types of recommendations I get all the time. I very rarely get asked for recommendations for like the person who's like the most incredible person at something unless they really need like a really good rigor or something like that. I would say that try lots of different things. Say yes. You'll find out there's sort of this delicate line, especially now, and I think it didn't exist quite as much when I was coming up, but I said yes to like literally every gig that came my way. I think that there's a lot more information out there and you can be a lot more judicious now to make sure that you don't get taken advantage of or you're paid appropriately and things like that. But, you know, that's how I ended up doing the House of Blues thing. I sort of didn't actually touch on this, but when I was in college, I did a study abroad and I ended up staying a lot longer because the show was transferring to West End, and the guy that was doing the run crew and was sort of my, like, I was interning under him, he got the avian flu virus and he was like incapacitated and they couldn't do it without somebody, and I knew the show. And so they extended my visa and I stayed. And that was a huge turning point in my career. In retrospect, I should have noted that earlier, but it was study abroad if you can, it's very cool. But again, that was literally just because I said yes. And I think that that's, you never know what experiences are going to come your way and the people that you're going to meet. And I think the more rounded you are as an individual, whether it be skills or experiences, I think that makes you a stronger technician, because it's amazing what you bring to a team and what random skill or random piece of knowledge that you have that you have no idea. And I think the other part is that there's no one way to go about it. I think that I would have never, I don't think I would be the artist I am today if I had gone to like a very specific conservatory program that was like huge and had a very tracked way to be. But my partner, that's the kind of school that he went to. He went to UCF, and he really flourished there. And so I think sort of knowing who you are, and which is, I think, is a really, it's a really hard thing to say because it's who knows themselves at all times. But I think that there's, just because it's a track that other people are taking doesn't mean that it has to be the right track for you. And it's kind of like with touring. Touring is for some people, and it was great for me, and I loved it. It's not for other people, and that doesn't make you a bad artist or a bad technician. It just means that you don't like to tour, and that's okay. And so I think that that's being sort of open and certainly being willing to explore, but also know the things that you don't like, because that's okay. Nobody gets paid enough in this industry. And so learning how to have a good life and a pleasurable life at doing this thing that you love, hopefully love, I think will make you more successful. And I think that that translates to your working environment and who you're working with and all the things around you.
Nice.
So.
Cool, thanks so much.
Yeah.
And then I think I'm going to take it to the last question here, and then we'll kind of move into like just a little bit more kind of conversational thing to kind of finish up with here. Yeah. Just curious how you see the industry changing. Like, this industry was changing fast and furiously before this all hit, and then with the pandemic and crowd sizes, I think some of those changes are going to be a little bit more long lasting than we hoped initially. So you know, kind of just technology wise and like where you saw it going before this, and like touching on, you know, the pandemic and the challenges to the industry, kind of like where you see this industry headed in the next few years.
You know, this is the question that I think stumps me more than anything else. I've been doing a lot of these kind of sessions lately. I think because I'm sort of an endlessly positive person. Like, I really want things to be like good and great, and I want problem solve. And COVID is resistant to that tact of things. But what I do see is there is a change in accountability that I think is really exciting. When we talk about diversifying the industry. If you haven't seen it, we see White American Theater is a really good example of it. And not only is it dealing with racial issues, but it's also talking about humanitarian issues, abolishing the 10 out of 12, which is just doesn't sound so bad on paper, but oh man, it is so long. And like on commercial productions, you do 7 of those back to back, and it's the worst. And so there's that. There's COVID has sort of forced producers and money people to take a really good look at crews and what like theater takes. And I think in a lot of ways, crews, whether you're run crews, your designers, your the in the shop making the product, if you're doing the notes calls, like all the different variations on the production team, labor is always something that's really hard to quantify to money people. If there's like a name and a person with it, it's a little bit easier, but it's hard, I think, for producers and money people to associate one with the other. And I think that because now we have to look at things like how many people we can have in a space at a time, and really talking about like, well, to get this set in, this is what it takes. And so we have to add another week of load in because it takes 10 carps and we don't want more than 10 people in our space at a time, or overlapping people. And so the way we're supporting shows, I think, is a huge thing, especially in New York, that's being talked about. I think the spaces where we put people, whether that's a green room space, it's our dressing rooms and things like that. So I think all these sort of systemic issues that have been kind of around for a long time are now being really forced issues, because they're not that they weren't before, certainly, but because now there's like a quantifiable reason you have to change them, other than like be a good person,
Yeah.
treat people like people. Like, so I think that that's sort of a huge thing. I think New York, in a very different way, is sort of paralyzed in a lot of ways, because we are sort of hamstrung in opening by the Broadway and sort of what they are stipulating to come back. Also, just New York is a lot of found spaces. The HVAC can't handle the air turnover and things like that. So I think New York doesn't really have a good solution, I don't think, right now for how we're going to come back. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of like, okay, what if, and if we did this, like what happens? And so there's a lot of, it may seem a little bit like an exercise in futility, but there's a lot of like game planning and playing out sort of the if, ands, and buts sort of in the New York scene, and all the production managers here. I don't know if there's an actual solution yet, but there's certainly a lot of people trying. But yeah, so I think that those are kind of the big things I see. I think the thing that's really incredible is the new generation of artists that are coming up, and that you guys aren't backing down, and I think that's awesome. I think that there's it's not just the current artists that are sort of making noise, that there's like a whole another subsect of people that are coming up that are a voice and a support to that. And I just think that that's awesome. So I think that that's something I take a lot of heart in, and I think is really positive. So not a great solutional answer, but yeah, that's the best I got.
And then if you could just touch like on technology, like how you see technology changing in our industry. Like the advent of like so much more video and projection working into some of this stuff, and some of the like augmented technologies that are coming in. And like if there's anything particularly you see really like a new technology that like people should take time to learn now before they get out into the like industry at large.
Yeah, well, I would certainly, the platforms, and there's a lot of different ones. There's basically creating sort of a virtual reality, whether it's working with like a virtual lighting system, whether it's working with how to like previs things. I think learning those skills right now are going to be really, really beneficial, because I think in all reality, the amount of time that we're spending physically in spaces is going to be to do tech and things like that, or to prep shows, or 3D rendering and that kind of stuff. I think those kind of things are going to become much more prevalent, because there's sort of this idea of like, it used to be like a meeting that could have been an email. Now it's like it's an in-person meeting that could have been digital. And so I think rather than bringing designers across the city or across the country to have a production meeting, that we're going to be seeing a lot more of those platforms. Also, anything that'll get us into through tech faster, and so that you can previs something, send it to a director and be like, is this what you're looking for? So I think those are the things that I see a lot of my people really investing the time and energy to learn. I think that that's going to be a really helpful tool. I think that those are kind of like the top things. I think the more people that get into video editing, which is sort of like, it's kind of the upcoming, everybody wants projections, everybody wants videos in their shows right now, but there's a huge lack of production and support to it. There's sort of like 8 people who were really good at it and everybody else is just kind of like bumbling along. Obviously that's now a huge skill set to have. And I think there's going to be a much bigger demand for it, both on the video editing end, but also the people to sort of do the pre-programming and sort of the conception of it. Oof, that word got real hard for a second. But I think that that's another thing that's going to be really big for people to be working with.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and kind of end our video recording session here. I'm going to invite people to kind of come back on and just ask any questions. We can kind of chat for a little bit and then we'll wrap this up. So thanks so much for joining us here.
Anytime.